Good evening, anarchists everywhere. Welcome to the second in the series, Anarchism in the UK, when I'll be talking to 6 veteran anarchists that I like to call the Freedom Pass anarchists, still growing old disgracefully and all over 60. I'm Ian Bone, a Freedom Pass anarchist myself. At one stage this week, it looked as if this collapse of capitalism might be at hand and the programme might be superfluous to requirements. However, capitalism proved as adaptable as ever, and the glorious age of libertarian communism has had to be postponed yet again. One anarchist who has been growing old disgracefully for longer than most is today's guest, John Rety. John Rety was editor of Freedom, the anarchist newspaper from 1963 to 68, and has been behind the Torrio Poets and Hearing Eye publications ever since. Welcome, John, to the programme.
Welcome indeed.
Okay, John, when did you first become aware of anarchist ideas?
Quite late, really. I must have been about 13 or 14.
Quite late.
We were discussing among our friends what kind of political systems would suit us best, and that was the first time I heard about anarchism.
And that would have been, I should have said you were born in Hungary in 1930, so that would have been during the war when you were still in Hungary?
It was during the war, yes, during the war. The war started when I was 9 years old, which didn't really please me at all. No. It was, like all wars, devastating, but it's devastating first and foremost to children who are growing up who haven't got a clue why their parents have gone completely berserk. And I must say that I had an excellent family. I got no criticism of my family, but after the war broke out, bit by bit they lost their cool, so to speak.
So how did anarchist ideas manage to surface in Budapest in the middle of World War II?
Well, I mean, you would imagine that in a war situation, everything is just war, but clearly life continues in any circumstance, and as children we try to ignore the madness of our peers, or adults, or whoever they were, and really try to remove ourselves from the system as much as we could.
You came to England in 1947. How long was it then before you got involved with other anarchists?
Well, I mean, I had some knowledge of English, but I had to sort of adjust myself into it. I was working for a book publisher, straight after I arrived here, who couldn't speak a word of English, and I was supposed to be the person who could help him, but there you go. He went bankrupt in 1950. Very nice man, but went bankrupt. And I found myself without a job, and I just walked around town. I went into a coffee house where there were lots of artists and writers, and I stayed there for several years.
Did you get a coffee in while you were there?
The coffee was not terribly good. It was the company. It was in Trafalgar Square. I took the attitude that, like most people, I don't know if anybody is listening to this who are about my age that will remember that after the war, nobody wanted another war. There were 2 or 3 years of determined effort, but then Korea was the first war, and then of course I became interested in anarchism when the nuclear issue was aired by Bertrand Russell and the rest of them. I joined the Committee 100, And I suppose I marched to all the Marston like the rest of them.
Yeah, the Committee of 100 then was the sort of more militant outcome of CND, who wanted to organise sit-downs in the streets and mass arrests in Trafalgar Square and so on.
That's right, that's right. I was convinced about the anarchist case, believe it or not, reading an editorial by In Freedom, which was sold then in the Charing Cross Road. I don't suppose they sell it nowadays. In the Charing Cross Road by Vernon Richards. Now, he was quite a controversial character, but he could write a long piece which had a beginning, middle and end. And he convinced me that the only, and this is the problem, that he convinced me at the time that only the state has the resources to fight a nuclear war or even have nuclear weapons. Of course, in those days, that argument could have held, but maybe not today.
Yeah. So, did you get arrested during any of the sit-ins? Did you sit
As
down
a matter of fact, I have not been arrested once, although I was there.
Yeah.
I nearly got arrested once when I was in a demonstration, but I put aside for some reason, and then I could just walk out of the station, which I did.
And what about, were you involved with the Spies for Peace at all, who published the, well, you don't have to admit to it, the Spies for Peace, when they publicised the addresses of the regional seats of government?
Not personally, no, I wasn't involved, but I possibly knew the people. I wished it's such a long time ago, and I wish some of the people are still alive who know about it could say something about it, because clearly those regional seats of government are either still there or not.
Yeah, yeah.
Huh?
That's about when I came onto the scene, was the Aldermaston marches, ran about late on the ones, I think around about 64, 65.
Yeah.
And I vividly remember seeing you with a very dashing red and black neckerchief on, mobilising a load of anarchists towards Trafalgar Square. It was all, I was the sort of callow youth anarchist, and it was frightfully exciting. Basically, we were just stopping, letting the gap, and then running, but it was all very exciting. I remember you cut an especially romantic figure in my imagination.
I haven't got that red and black handkerchief anymore. It was given to me by Michael Garcia when he was released out of Spain.
Because that was the first wave of sort of radicalisation after the war, the CND, Committee of 100 and so on. So how did you then go on to get involved with Freedom?
Well, Philip Sansom, who was one of the editors of Freedom, and he was an excellent draftsman and very good speaker, got me to speak in Hyde Park. And I think... and then afterwards, I organised some readings at the Lamb and Flag pub, which was very difficult for anarchists to meet anywhere in London, because the police are always after them and tell the landlord not to have meetings. Tell the landlord not to have meetings. But I went along to this pub and said. And I booked this place, but because of my accent, I suppose, a year later, we had very, very large crowd. A year later, the lady, the publican, said to me, well, excuse me, why are so many people interested in anagrams? She told the police that these people were interested in anagrams. Clearly, the police wasn't interested in solving, but...
So...
That was that, but then Philip sort of approached me and said, look, you got some journalistic experience, and you have been freelancing, this, that and that, and we need somebody actually who can put that paper together, because they're all stodgy long articles. Well, I didn't think they were stodgy long articles. I read them from cover to cover. But I got into Freedom. And nobody asked me if I knew anything about anarchism. What?
Well, you only edited the anarchist paper.
That's good enough, isn't it? Yeah. And what I couldn't realise was why there were so many people squabbling in the anarchist movement. It's remarkable. I mean, some of them are still alive, who are still writing sort of these very difficult letters to the paper. But I just printed everything that people sent and went to Scotland and to Wales and other places and got the people who have been quarrelling themselves to contribute towards the paper. And I think that was probably the best. It was the best way to increase circulation because the Scottish anarchists had an issue each month and so on and so forth.
And
it went in rotation. Yeah.
Did you get round to reading the holy texts of anarchism by then? Bakunin, Kropotkin, Malatesta? Did you get stuck?
Right. Well, I did try to read them. Kropotkin is readable.
And a forerunner of yours was editor of Freedom, wasn't he?
No. Before, but look, I did read Proudhon. You need a really, I mean, they are all very difficult writers. Possibly the reason that anarchism never got anywhere is because all their writers are, with the exception of Kropotkin, who could write, and Malatesta, who could argue. Bakunin, I could never understand what he was talking about. But I find
that... This is a terrible admission.
I'm sorry about that. I mean, basically one is in favour of Bakunin for what he says, but...
If you could understand what it was.
If you understand every word, yeah. Very...
So did you, in terms of the ongoing feuds, did you ever get caught up in the epic long-running feud between Albert Meltzer and Vernon Richards, or did that pass
Well,
you
this
by?
is very difficult because Albert Meltzer was really a very able man, and he wanted to be the editor of Freedom. There's no doubt about it, to my mind. And he was very disappointed when Vernon, who practically retired, Vernon Richards, who practically retired, didn't ask him to do so. And I remember him approaching a lot of people to start another paper, and that's why he started Black Flag, because he just wanted his opinions to get through. What he couldn't do, he was in the wrong company there, I think, because they pushed him a little bit further than he wanted to go. Whereas if he were editing Freedom, he would have been an excellent editor, I think.
That's very interesting indeed, John. That's very interesting to hear you say that.
Yeah.
I mean, Freedom in the early 60s, I think, was a bit stodgy. And then under your editorship, it seemed to lighten up a lot and have a lot more shorter, newsy bits. But the sea change must have come in the years 67, 68. I mean, 67, you had to have the Summer of Love and hippies. Then 68, you had the Student Revolution, the May events in France. And I noticed Freedom must have I think you upped the circulation from about 3,000 to 12,000.
Well, yes, and I took to task because it was in those places printed by letterpress. And there were only two people there. There was Dick Pugh, a master printer. He was a beautiful printer, and he put the lead letters into a chase and worked on it and printed the whole thing by hand. And there was Ben, who was helping to print, and I had to take the articles down to Stepney Green, where there was a typesetter there who would do it. But the point about letterpress was so important that it not only did it look good, the paper looked good, but because of the method of printing, we could beat the daily papers. I always left half a column empty for the latest bit of news that they didn't have time. So those that got the paper, we actually beat them journalistically.
Yeah, in a proper newspaper.
Yeah.
Did you, in sort of like I did in science, get caught up in the excitement of 1968 and think that there was radical change was possible?
Yes, radical change was possible. The only difficulty was that we had no contact really with the working class. The working class we approached through our own methods and what have you. We had a lot of people, trade unionists who worked for freedom, like Peter Turner and Bill Christopher, and they had a back page to themselves. But the thing was this, that where we put where the big crowds of anarchists suddenly came from were the universities and the sit-ins and the students and everything else. And it was before its time. I think now it's a much more... it would be more possible today to argue for anarchism to a larger public, because the groundwork was done by not just by freedom. Am I able to mention class war? I mean, class war was possibly the paper that the working people did read, and because of its liveliness and what have you, and less dogma.
In the 60s, I mean, there was a big rise in other underground papers, things like Oz and International Times, and you had Black Dwarf and Red Money.
Yes.
I mean, they suddenly shot out of the blues. I mean,
yes,
did they sort of influence you?
Yes, in fact, International Times was the paper that completely confused the issue. It sounded as if they were interested in anarchism. I don't think they were. They at all, and I don't think they were. They at all, and they diffused the situation, and also the songs and everything else. The people, there were a lot of people interested in anarchism, but it is it was not possible in those days to bring about an anarchist society. Today, it's quite different. I just come back from Lewis. Yesterday, I was in Lewis, and they're issuing their own money.
With Tom Paine on?
Yes, and it looks very good. And I went around the town, and the Lewis Arms, they were discussing it, and they very much approve it. Or some people say, I don't see the point of it, and some people say, it's going to end up the same way as everything else, because they're going to sell those banknotes on eBay and that kind of thing. But
well, it's nice to see Tom Paine.
And why Tom Paine? They say he was a tax collector, wasn't he?
We'll gloss over that aspect.
Gloss over, yes.
The thing I think in the 60s was the fundamental feeling of the student movement all over there was a libertarian by nature, but in this country certainly you got the spokesman ended up being people like Tariq Ali and the Trotskyists and the Vietnam Solid, and all the publicity, and they seem to attract all the publicity and the actual anarchist influence.
Yes.
I think you were on both.
I think Tariq Ali was a very I remember Tariq Ali, the first time I saw him, we had a demonstration against the Vietnam War in Trafalgar Square, and we hired the square, and there were lots and lots of people, and Tariq Ali was there, jumping up and down with a contingent of Oxford undergraduates, shouting, "Ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh," and that type of thing. And I must say that they were very clever in, again, confusing the issue just as much as International Times. He's still about confusing the issue, but he's a very lovely, gentle person,
And were you on the first Grosvenor Square demonstration, the March one? Which
I was there, yes.
Tell us about that.
It was
about the most exciting demonstration for you.
I personally, this is very difficult. I personally have come to the conclusion that I'm not terribly fond of violence, and I think that violence itself means that we have lost the argument, because you have to, not just violence, but extra. I mean, all these governments, they wouldn't be there if they didn't have their firing power behind it. I mean, they have lost the argument long time ago, and most people realize that. But it's very difficult to shift the situation.
But did you find the demonstration exciting, though? I mean, in terms of moving on from the sit-downs of CND, You know,
well, yes, suddenly there were hundreds of thousands of people. But remember that I was there in Speaker's Corner for 13 days, fasting to end the Vietnam War with the company of 12 other anarchists.
Really?
And we would not have even glass of water. And I think that kind of thing could be people might admire that kind of thing more than as to who is throwing stone faster than the other.
You really can't sort of underestimate the influence of the Vietnam War in radicalising people, can you? There's those nightly images on the TV screen of napalm and Agent Orange.
Yes, well, I mean, we did have a very, very big, and the Americans have American youth were very left-wing at that time and very forward-looking, and so were the universities here.
You finished editing Freedom in '69. Why was that?
Well, I finished editing Freedom in '69 for various reasons. I wanted to increase the circulation of Freedom, and there were lots of people who didn't have any money but were willing to give away copies to all and sundry, and they said, we are not here to impoverish the anarchist movement. And I think they were wrong, because it always had a fund, appeal for funds, and the more people read that thing, the more people would have helped. So I think they were wrong.
It's a peculiarity of some English anarchists that they don't seem to like it when anarchist ideas get popular.
Yes.
They want to keep the ideas to a small coterie of people, and they don't like it when that exclusivity is gone.
And remember that I regard the 1968 situation, the French, without asking anybody else, and without preparing themselves properly. I mean, I did argue the case, and most people don't like the argument that maybe they should not have. After they were defeated by de Gaulle, and we had to retrench ourselves because some of our ideas were defeated, and Bandit came to London, and I asked him. Were you there? No. It was and I asked him, that the press is reporting that he was an anarchist. He says he's never been an anarchist, never intends to be an anarchist. But I don't know whether he was pulling my leg. He had a sense of humour.
Yeah.
But you really have to have. I mean, if there is a small thing that actually works, like Robert Owen's what have you, is still there up in Scotland, in Lancashire, and that could point towards people, yes, if it works for 20,000 people, it can work for more.
So after 1969, what have you been doing since then? So after 1969, what have you been doing since then?
Well, 1969, yes. I have continued writing for Freedom, and of course I went along to any odd demonstration, but I really pulled back because I didn't want to enter into the sectarian arguments that went on in the anarchist movement any longer. I think that if we could have cut out those 20 years or what have you, although, I mean, there was a lot of things to do which were not specifically anarchist, like when Thatcher came to power, there was a lot of hardship for working people, and one continued. In about 1970, 1980, I became. They asked me to help with a community place in Kentish Town Toriano Meeting House. But they asked me, I mean, probably I also forced the issue a bit. I turned towards poetry because I found that in the situation, maybe the poetry, they are not rich people, they just write what they want to write. And maybe their thoughts can be, they are more interesting than and it's kept me going for a few years.
So this is the Toriano Poets, and you've also been involved with Hearing Eye publications?
Yes, well, the point is this, that once a poem is said on the air or here and there, it ought to be printed for future. And so, I don't know how, but we printed about 150 books.
Brilliant. And I hear there's a vacancy, so Andrew Motion might be stepping down as Poet Laureate. I wondered if that's something that, if offered, you might take.
I don't know. I don't know. I think Andrew Motion is probably was the quietest Poet Laureate ever, and he himself says that it has been an arduous task for nothing.
Well, personally, I'd love to see you write a poem to celebrate the Queen's birthday, John.
Well, the Queen, and her birthday. I think John Heath Stubbs should have been the Poet Laureate. He was a blind man. He was a Tory, and he would have written these pieces. But why? Adrian Mitchell, maybe he wants to be, but then nobody's going to ask him. They're going to get some establishment person who will say nothing for the next 4 years.
We've got about 4 minutes left. What do you think of the sort of contemporary anarchist movement today? Are you hopeful about change? Do you see signs which are encouraging?
I really feel that the contemporary anarchist movement is healthier than it was at the time when we were about. It now belongs to people. To people out there who are doing various things, like tomorrow in Hastings. If you happen to go to Hastings, there's going to be there are people trying to persuade others not to drive a car. This happened in Newcastle. It happened. It's not that the anarchist movement is. There are some very good papers. The one I always read, it's very occasional, is by Simcock, libertarian. I can't even remember the title of it, but it's Jonathan Simcock is the editor anyway. Yeah. But they haven't. It will be interesting to see in about 10 years' time what has happened, because clearly people just have to make a decision over their lives, unless they want to spend it in perpetual war and to be in the hands of certain zombies that call themselves government.
And you still remain an anarchist, as much of an anarchist? You've always never any doubts? You're still committed to anarchism?
I feel that without anarchism, no political system could exist. This is the problem. There has to be some kind of, say in a household, say the mother comes up suddenly and says, well, pay me for the breakfast I provided to the husband and the 3 kids. Pay me. It doesn't happen inside a household. In a household, inside people's family homes, people behave as if they are completely, or should do. There are some tyrannical people. But once you leave and bang the door behind your house, then it's a different system. You pay for everything.
Okay, well, John, thank you very much. It's been an absolutely fascinating quick half hour of rock through English anarchism.
Well, I thank you, because I very
much
much admired what you were doing as well.
And I'd just like to add another plug. John's plugged something happening in Hastings tomorrow. I can say in London tomorrow at 12 o'clock outside the stock exchange is actually going to be a Down with Capitalism demonstration. And Spibs and Speculators out, which will probably consist of me and about 4 other people. But if you're around at 12 o'clock outside the stock exchange in Paternoster Square tomorrow. Okay, that's the end of the second programme in the series. I have another veteran anarchist guest next week. Thank you very much.